Welcome to another episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? I am so glad that you've come back. You're going to love this conversation. I have two amazing guests. If you don't know me, I am Karen E. Osborne. I'm the author of Getting It Right, which is a family saga suspense story, tangled lies, a murder mystery, all strong, wonderful, amazing women that lead reckonings. And coming this fall on September 7th is True Grace, a story that takes place in the 1924 during the Roaring Twenties and the Harlem Renaissance. And my guests today are Alyson Richman and Shaunna Edwards. And they did something remarkable because they were able to write a book together. So it is hard enough writing a book by yourself, but writing a book together is a whole lot more. But maybe we could start our conversation with how you guys know each other.
So we've been friends for over a decade, and we like to sort of always share our meet cute story of how we met because it's quite funny. We met in what I like to say was probably one of the most unlikeliest places for me. And Shaunna usually has a twinkle in her eye and says it wasn't so unlikely for her. But we met in Las Vegas. And my husband is a corporate attorney. In Shaunna's former life, she was a practicing corporate attorney. And she and my husband were invited to an all-expense paid vacation at the Four Seasons Hotel in Las Vegas for some sort of, attorney boon,
It was a boondoggle. You can say it. Boondoggle.
So I was waiting online that first night at the bar, and I was just so happy because I had two kids under the age of 5 at that time to be on a vacation with my husband. And I was letting every single man cut in front of me who looked like he needed a drink more than I did. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see this beautiful young woman come walking over to me, and she looks at me and she says, "Why are you letting every single man cut in front of you? You're clearly not an attorney." And so
that was absolutely true. Even then, I was like, no social injustice. But no, she was right. She was also wearing this beautiful dress. So I think I said, "I love your dress," because she was wearing a papaya-colored dress in a sea of gray and black. And you could already tell she had an artist's sensibility. And so I think I asked you, Alyson, I said, "Well, why are you here? What do you do to occupy your time?" And after she told me that her husband was a lawyer, she said, "I'm a writer." And I am sure that my eyes grew saucer wide because I majored in literature in college. And I feel like the ability to create characters, to create stories, but even more so, have someone interested enough to read them and to make a living at it, I really felt like I was meeting like a real live unicorn in Las Vegas. So I demanded that basically that weekend that she be my friend and that we be friends for life. And it's really been this love of books that has cemented our friendship. The idea that as an avid reader, and I never imagined at the time we met that I would be privileged enough to become an author, but that I could get inside an author's brain, figure out how they create stories. And I would always ask, like, what are you working on? What are you reading? Like, just give me a glimpse into your world. And so it's been a wonderful friendship for many reasons. But as someone who is so passionate about the word, it's been really fulfilling in that way. So we got lucky in Las Vegas.
we did. We hit the jackpot.
That sounds really good. So Alyson, so when you met Shaunna, you were already a published author. How many books do you have out in the world?
So The Thread Collectors is my 8th novel. Wow. And at the time I met Shaunna, I was working on my 4th. So so sort of met her in the midpoint. And then we had this wonderful project together. I really feel like it was fated that we were meant to meet and then create what became the Thread Collectors.
Yeah, so tell me about that, Shaunna. Tell me what's the premise? First, let's start with the premise. What is the premise of the Thread Collectors?
So in the Thread Collectors, which is set during the Civil War, 1863, you're going to meet two couples. There's a couple, which is Black, comprised of Stella, and Stella is enslaved. She's being forced to live with a man that she does not want to live with. I'll just put it like that. And in her free time, she's creating these maps from repurposed cloth and thread to help enslaved men flee to join the Union Army. She's down in New Orleans, which is my hometown. She's in love with William, who is also a brilliant Black musician. He's enslaved. And William's like, I'm going to seek freedom. And he runs to join the Union Army as well. And on the battlefields of Louisiana, William, this Black man, this man who's been enslaved, meets Jacob Kling, who is a German Jewish musician. And it's that love of music that binds them. Jacob has been encouraged to join the Union Army by his beautiful, fiery abolitionist wife, Lily Kling, who's up in New York. She's doing some sewing of her own. She's in a quilt circle. They're making quilts to help sell and fund the Union Army cause, and also to provide Union Army soldiers with comfort. So you've got these four characters, right? Two women, two men, and from every aspect, they seem like they're completely different, right? In terms of like their freedom, in terms of their socioeconomic status, their heritage, their race, their faith. But as the book unfolds against the backdrop of what has been the most cataclysmic thing in our country, you find that there is hope and optimism, and they have more in common than they would appear. And I think sometimes Alyson and I will be sitting somewhere, and we refer to each other as sisters now, and people scratch their head a little bit, right? Like, I'm a Black Southern Catholic woman. She is a Jewish Northeastern, woman. And like, we don't necessarily look like we have something in common, but so much about us is the same. And I think that's what we were trying to bring forward in the Thread Collectors.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So, Alyson, what was it like? Because here you were writing by yourself, which is such a solitary and profoundly, I just have to get there. I've got to get these words on the, and we live in our heads, right? All of our characters are talking to us in our heads. How did you make room for Shaunna? How did that unfold?
Well, I had a very loose idea for a Civil War novel that had been in my head for some time. I had grown up very close with my maternal grandmother, who had sort of an interesting family story in her, ancestral tree. Her family, they were Jewish, but part of the family came over very early to the United States in the 1830s from Germany. And she shared with me that I had two great uncles who fought on opposite sides during the Civil War. That one uncle went down to Mississippi, the other one stayed in New York. And when the Civil War broke out, they both took opposing sides on slavery. And obviously, military wise, I'm taking sides on one in the Confederacy and the other in the Union. And I was very fascinated with this idea of two brothers who are children of immigrants themselves to a new country, who look at slavery different, and what, how that relationship was forever divided, because my grandmother shared with me that, her northern uncle, broke family ties with the southern uncle, and that she used to joke and say, now that side of the family is Baptist, but we have nothing to do with them anymore. The ones down south. So I had shared with Shaunna, because Shaunna was always that person that I would go to when I had an idea for a book. And I would say, would you read this? She's such a lover of books, an avid reader. I went to her book club, all these things. She was always that litmus test. And I had recently started sort of digging and doing research. And I learned also about how 180,000 Black men enlisted in the Union Army to fight for freedom. That was 10% of the Union, Army. But instead of being given muskets to fight, they were given pickaxes and hoes and forced to do all sorts of demeaning manual work, like digging latrines and also burying the Civil War dead. I also had learned that maps were sometimes created, and that maps were created to sort of document where people were buried, so that the hope after the war that these maps could be given to family members, and they could hopefully bury the fallen soldiers properly up north. So I had said that to Shaunna, and does that sound like a good idea? But Shaunna, you can talk about right away, she had this instant reaction to the material. And there was this sort of energy between us, right, Shaunna?
Yeah, and I love the way you put that, Karen, like, make room for me, because I think the important thing for listeners to know is, when we were first speaking about this idea, I wasn't thinking about it like I could ever participate in this. I was reacting to her idea, and I was intrigued, but also as a Black woman, I was so compelled by the Black soldier. I wanted to know his backstory. And so I said, well, what if he gives the information he has to his beloved, and she stitches a sewn map or something visual. Because
Mm.
in my mind, understanding the plight of enslaved Black people at the time, they weren't taught how to read and write. You're not going to have a traditional map. I come from a family of people who were like farmed cotton quilt makers. And this idea of like Black ingenuity and also Black love, I just kind of became enthralled by it. So I shared that with Alyson, and she didn't write that book at that time, although she could have. Like, this was me giving an idea freely from my heart. But when the world was kind of broken in 2020, she came back and she asked me if I wanted to build story with her, if I wanted to write with her. So the way you put that was exactly right. She would have been completely okay with just taking the kernel that I had given her, but she knew that together we could create something kind of magical. And so she did, in every sense of the word, make room for me. And yeah.
And I look back at this, Karen, almost like it was destiny that she came into my life in Las Vegas and right away said to me, I always dreamt of writing a book. I love to read. I was a literature major at Harvard. Like, from the moment I met Shaunna, I knew that she was, stitched to literature, that she aspired to write her own book. And we always had this great synergy of exchanging stories as friends. And so it was it wasn't like I did a lot of, thought like, could I call Shaunna? Do I think she would do a good job? It's crazy to ask her. It just felt very fluid and very natural. And honestly, there is nobody else in the world that I would feel that way, that I could offer that space for. It just felt like this natural extension of my heart with this story, that she would make it better, more layered. And that, we didn't know, Shaunna, right, that we could work well together building the story writing wise, but that also came through in this very fluid way. We were just, meant to write this book. I really feel that way.
That's fabulous. So did you take turns on, like, this chapter is your chapter, or these characters are your characters?
No, we did not. I think, and we are seeing more collaborations and people are approaching it in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
We were pretty clear at the beginning. We did not want to take what might seem the most obvious route, like, Shaunna, you deal with all the Black people. Alyson, you deal with all the white people, because it felt for us antithetical to what we wanted to do, which was to blend the voices, blend the heritages. And I will say that it probably would have been a less personally fulfilling journey for me if we had done that, because, like, I know what my story is. I know my family's story, but like, to sit and learn about Alyson's, and as someone from a marginalized background, to think about what other people who were underrepresented as well were going through at that time period. Like, I have been reading about Civil War history for a long time, and I'm peeking over your shoulder, and I see that you do too, Karen. But like, I hadn't known, or I hadn't focused on the fact that, like, Grant expelled Jews from the Union Army. There are so many things that happen in a time period like the Civil War that impact people differently in different populations, but you can get very fixated on your own, like your own lens, your own people. And I think that if Alyson and I had approached it differently, and Alyson, you should talk about the actual way we wrote it, the technical way, but if we had approached it differently, like, you take this chapter or this voice and I take the other, we wouldn't have been able to explore that and really put that tension on the page and bring it to our readers.
It's interesting that one of the things you said that it really resonated with me is that when you come from a marginalized population, you don't always see how other people are marginalized. It feels very, and I was, my historical novel, my grandmother was an immigrant and mixed race, and her husband was Jewish, but he in Jamaica was treated, because he was gentry. It was fine. But when she came to America and she met this privileged Jewish woman, and then she found out that she wasn't privileged at all. She was privileged because she had money, but there was so many rules,
so many layers,
all the layers. And at one point, Grace says, "Oh my goodness, I never thought about that. I never noticed." And I think that's very true. So I think this is beautiful. I should tell you that I have purchased your book already, and I have started it, just so you know.
Good. And we're not giving any spoilers away. We appreciate it.
You got me so intrigued when I was researching you that I said, okay, I have to read this book.
Thank you.
because I can't possibly, I do a show every week, so I can't
Yeah.
really read everybody's book. But yours just said, read me, read me.
Well,
So tell me something, Alyson, something that, pick any character, something that you admired about them a lot, that you loved about this character.
well, I think when I discovered, my grandmother didn't know that her great great uncle, I guess it would be my great great great, that he was a musician in the Union Army. She just knew that he fought, on the northern side. And it was my brother who dug up that fact, that when he found his regiment, that he had listed as a musician. And all of my books, before the Thread Collectors, the ones that are now coming after the Thread Collectors, I always have a character who is artistic, is creative in some way. And I always sort of explore that against a historical backdrop, because I love to see how a creative person's productivity, their need to express himself is never diminished during a very dark time in history, that it always manages somehow to emerge and often give them sustenance, and also sometimes as a form of resistance. I mean, there's so many things that you can explore when you're dealing with someone who is artistic. And so when I discovered that, and I said to Shaunna right away that I wanted to create a character that honors my ancestor, that he was a musician. I mean, she was so excited right away to be able to create a foil and have William a musician in the Black troops, and that sort of cements their friendship in the same way that Shaunna and I right away book cemented our friendship. So that's, I think, the thing that I discovered that I was so excited about, and to be able to create a character to honor that and to learn more about what a Union musician was like, and then weave a character from another community where their friendship is threaded together with music.
So Shaunna, how about you? Tell me about a character, one of the characters that something about them that you just love. You just like.
No, it's a great question. So it's actually a secondary character. Our main Black heroine, she's actually biracial. Her name is Stella. All of these names are family names for me. Stella's my mama's name, so I had to do right by our main Black heroine. But she's got a sister, Amine, who is fully Black, living in her sister's house, essentially as an enslaved person in her enslaved sister's house. And for me, that was important because I'm from the Deep South. I'm from Louisiana. I have family, as many Black people do, that span the spectrum of skin shades. My father was very, very light. My mother is darker than I am. And this issue of colorism is something that was keenly felt at the time in New Orleans and Louisiana. There were laws based around it before Louisiana became part of America. And it's something that has certainly impacted my life and still exists today. Just our preference for people with lighter skin. And there were times I can remember in elementary school, people would say things to me like, "Aren't you angry? You don't look like your sisters," because my sisters are about your shade, Karen. And I remember feeling the pain of that. And I wanted to bring that to the page and say, like, it's not so binary, it's not Black, it's white. We have all these gradations. And sometimes the people who are cruelest are the people who share your identity. And so for me, our character Amine, who, in spite of almost everything being stacked against her, she is a darker skinned woman, enslaved. She is consistently resourceful. She is fighting against the Confederacy in her way. She is making decisions in spite of the fact that her choices are very limited. And for me, that is the history of Black women in America and Black women in my family. We also have one other Black character. I know I'm going on, but I'll tell you, like, her name is Janie, and she's the matriarch, and Janie's also a family name. And Janie was inspired by my great aunt, Janie Roach. And this woman at the time, she became a landowner. She became a lender to her family. She pissed them off because she was charging interest, but she knew what she had to do to create financial stability. And when I think about her, Amine is a family name too, and I think about the character of Amine, just that like ceaselessness, I guess, that willingness to look all of these obstacles in the face and say, I'm still going to move forward in the way that I can. It admires me, like I admire it, and it almost like inspires me. It's weird though to say, but you can tell I'm a new writer. It's weird to say that somebody you created on the page inspired you. But
weird at all. These people are alive. They're in our,
They
they're
are
our
alive.
friends.
They're our heart on the page. They are.
Yes. Oh my goodness. That doesn't sound weird at all.
It's proof you're a real writer, Shaunna.
Sounds perfect. Most of us are schizophrenic, you know, like, who are you talking to? So how can our, oh no, I need book recommendations.
Mhm.
So besides reading their book, and I will tell you, I will be sure to write a review of The Thread Collectors after I finish it. But is there a book that, Alyson, that you could recommend to our audience?
Well, I think one of my most favorite historical novels is a book called The Marriage of Opposites, written by Alice Hoffman. And it takes place on St. Thomas, and it delves in with the story of Camille Pizarro's mother. They're a Jewish family on St. Thomas. And so it's beautiful, evocative language, but it deals with a woman who is creative herself, but also part of a very small marginalized community on St. Thomas. And it's just one of my most favorite historical novels. I love it. So The Marriage of Opposites by Alice Hoffman.
Excellent. And Shaunna, do you have one?
Yes, and I had to pull out my phone because I didn't want to get the title wrong. I just finished Where Waters Meet by Zhang Ling. And the thing that I liked about it, it's about the conflict basically between Asian countries during World War II, which is something that I've read a lot about the period, but really don't think a lot about the Pacific end of that war if it doesn't involve like America. So this was just a really interesting take for me once again about these conversations between different marginalized groups, like the trauma that's been inflicted upon people that may look very similar if you're coming from the white gaze. And I thought it was just like beautiful because it was nuanced. It was completely new for me culturally, and it was inspired by the author's family history. So that's always wonderful too, because it just had a level of authenticity about it that really stuck with me. So yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you for those. So how can our audience be in touch with you? Where can they find you? Where can they speak to you, write you? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, we do have a website, thethreadcollectors.com, which, has information, book club questions about our books and some of our speaking engagements. And you can find me at Facebook and at Instagram, just at my name at Alyson, Alyson Richman.
Yep.
Excellent.
And I'm on Instagram too, Shaunna J. Edwards, spelled just like it is on the bottom of the screen. And I'm on Facebook too, Shaunna J. Edwards. We try to make it easy for people.
Yeah, exactly. which is a good marketing strategy.
Right.
I want to thank you both. This has just been delightful. And I want to thank all of you for coming in. I know you enjoyed this conversation. So when you get in touch with Alyson, when you get in touch with Shaunna, be sure to tell them that you met them on What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Until next time, everybody, have a great week.